Welcome everyone who's just joining. We're going to give it just a couple of minutes before we get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. You're here at Vivvi and Lalo's Childcare 101 session. Thanks so much for taking the time to learn with us. Welcome, welcome. Okay, so for anybody who's just joining, I want to do a little introduction exercise. We are going to put in the chat, and I will go first to break the ice. We're going to put in the chat, if you're pregnant, how far along are you? What is the age of your baby if you're postpartum or a parent or caregiver? And where are you located? Where in the world are you calling in from? So I'll go first. And I'm Julia. I am 36 weeks pregnant. I'm typing. I have a 14-month-old Aster, and I'm calling in from Brooklyn. Okay, and we'll get started with the program at just about like 7:03, 7:04. We'll just give people a minute to get here. Welcome, everyone. And also panelists, Geneva, Michael, tell us. If you're pregnant, how far along are you? How many months or years are your children? And where are you calling in from today? Feel free to come off mute or put it in the chat, up to you.
I'm Michael. I have two little ones, a 2.5-year-old girl and a 11-week-old boy, and I live in Brooklyn.
Hi, Michael, welcome. And we'll do like more formal, sort of like longer intros in a second. We'll just give people a second to get here. I'm playing like the Jeopardy music in my head. It's like, all right, we'll just give it like one more minute. And I see, like, I'm looking at Geneva and Michael, and both behind you, you have like these amazing sort of like abstract art pieces. And I think one is by a child and one is by like a renowned artist.
You could still buy mine for $2 million. I'll tell. That'll be a good investment.
It truly is a work of art.
Yeah.
All righty. So we'll give people, actually, let's just kick it off. So on behalf of Vivvi, I'm so happy to be here with you all today. I'm Julia Steele. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing here at Vivvi. I have a 14-month-old named Aster, as I mentioned, and I'm 8 months and 2 days pregnant with baby number 2. So I'm truly feeling what you're all feeling tonight. We're thrilled to get started on what we know will be a really thoughtful conversation about childcare. I'm joined here today by Michael, the co-founder of Lalo, Geneva, who's a Wall Street working mom with a child that attends Vivvi's Tribeca location, and also developmental psychologist and founder of the Seedlings Group, Dr. Bronwyn. Everyone on this panel has young children and knows how important childcare is, not just for your child, but also for yourself as a parent. So I can't wait to dig into this conversation. Before we get started, I just wanted to set the stage of my first instance looking of childcare. So when I was pregnant with Aster, I was so freaked out about like, how do you actually go about hiring a nanny? I knew that a nanny was the right choice for my family, but I had even though I had, hired lots of people in my job as a marketer, I had no idea what questions to ask a nanny in a job interview. I had no idea how to write the contract, what constituted sort of like fair pay and benefits. So for me, the learning curve was super steep. And also this person was going to be watching my beloved baby all day. So the stakes felt like super high. Luckily, I think when I was like about this pregnant with the first one, we got a great referral to a wonderful nanny through my doula. But the process, like to get there until that point, was so much more challenging than I had ever imagined or anticipated. So at Vivvi, we know that this finding childcare process is a huge stressor for most parents. Like my story is really common. And it's one of the reasons why we're so excited to be hosting these monthly conversations about Childcare 101. We're hoping that you can leave with a little bit of information, feel a little less anxious. So if you're not familiar with Vivvi, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what we do to get started. We're a childcare and early learning company. We work with families in a number of different ways. So here in New York, we have 5 beautiful campuses that accept children from 6 weeks to 5 years old. We also have an in-home program that takes the guesswork out of sourcing and managing a nanny. Like I wish I would have known about that a year ago when I was looking. And all these nannies for Vivvi in-home are passionate about early childhood education and bring monthly curriculum into your home, which is pretty rare as far as nannies go. So I wanted to share a couple of program logistics, and then we'll hop into talking to our panelists. So we're going to have 45 minutes today. We'll use the first 30 to ask the panelists a few questions. And then we'll head over to the chat function and surface up some of the wonderful questions that you sent in with your RSVP forms. And we'll use the rest of the 15 minutes or so to answer as many of those as possible. So also, I just want to acknowledge, like, childcare is a huge topic. There's no way we're going to get to every aspect of it or even every question. And like I said, our goal is that you just walk away feeling a little bit more informed. So with that, I'm going to give it over to our panelists just to introduce themselves and do a quick intro and talk to us about why this topic hits home for you personally. So Michael, why don't you go first?
Sure. So I'm Michael. I'm co-founder of Lalo. I have 2 little ones, a 2.5-year-old and a 11-week-old. And for me, this topic hits home, especially as an entrepreneur, and needing to make sure that my children had the proper childcare and our family had the proper childcare to allow both my wife and I to support our careers and support our families and our sanity, and also to make sure we felt our kids were developing in the ways that were important to us.
Thank you. Geneva, why don't you go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Geneva Kwok, and I am a new mom to my 10-month-old daughter. Her name is Aria. I'm also a fur mommy to a beautiful dog named Truffles. But yes, before I became a mom, which is now my most important job, I do have a day job and I work on Wall Street. I'm learning and I'm still learning. It's just been overwhelming and continues to be overwhelming. So participating in something like this is really meaningful and really important. Also to mention, my daughter's my most precious. She was also 6 weeks early. So I'm extra conscious of this. And additionally, and unfortunately, I don't have family help. They're not accessible or close by or able to help me. So it's only my husband and I, and then therefore how important childcare is for us.
Thank you. That resonates with me. I also don't have family close by. And I once saw a meme that was like, you know, it takes a village to raise a child. Like, where's the village? Can someone drop me a pin? And I'm still wondering that myself. Please drop me a pin. All right, with that, Dr. Bronwyn, please go next.
Hello, I'm Bronwyn. I am a developmental psychologist and also mom. I have an almost 16-year-old. So now instead of looking for childcare, I'm looking at colleges, which is a whole other big search that's overwhelming. And I have a 12-year-old turning 13 on Friday and an 8-year-old who's in 3rd grade. So I have very much been there adding more children one after the other. And so having to rethink childcare arrangements as there became more children in the home. Much like everyone on this panel and probably everyone else, childcare really mattered to me. Apart, obviously, aside from the obvious, being someone to take care of most precious people to me, but also to allow my husband and I to have the flexibility in working on our own careers. And flexibility was really key, given that I have a practice called Seedlings Group, where I meet with parents in hospitals and schools to develop research-based information on child development and parenting, often on their time, which means a lot at night or a lot early in the morning. And so that was really critical to my decision in terms of childcare.
Wonderful.
And I'm excited to be here.
And
And
congratulations.
I pretty much just am here to learn from Bronwyn. So everybody here is pretty lucky to have
You
Bronwyn
guys are
here,
already
because
in your
every
childcare.
yeah. But
Sounds like
every
might have a
time I've
topic
seen,
that we-
every time I talk to Bronwyn, I go home and have an entire dinner conversation about whatever Bronwyn said. So you're all lucky to have her here.
Wonderful. And Bronwyn, congratulations on making it to the teenage years, because that just seems,
Yeah.
for those of us with little ones, it seems, as you remember, so far out
away.
of reach. Yeah.
It's really not. It goes very quickly.
All right, wonderful. So I'd love to kick it off by talking about finding childcare. Michael, when did you start looking, I guess, with your first, and what were some of your considerations? So why did you choose the situation that you went into?
Yeah, so my daughter was born in February 2020, and obviously, right into the pandemic, and we started looking for childcare. We actually kind of hacked together childcare for a while. We do have grandparents somewhat locally and really willing to help, but ultimately, the kind of mix and match childcare was creating a lot of additional stress. So by the time my daughter was about 16 months old, maybe a little bit younger than that, it was clear that we needed some more structured support that allowed us to have a bit more routine in our life, and more consistency in the childcare we were receiving. It was becoming a lot to manage or try to manage a child's routine and systems, and create some systems for our child and our family with different childcare every day. So that was when we started trying to figure out what was going to be right, and daycare, nanny. Ultimately, at that point, we hired a nanny who worked with us until this summer, right before my son was born, and knowing that my daughter was going to be transitioning to preschool at that time as well. So, and I think during that time, she was with us for just about a year. We learned a lot about what's important to us in childcare, and probably would have made the same decision, but would have maybe looked for different things in a nanny, and have for our son when he transitions to a nanny once my wife goes back to work.
Yeah, we don't know what we don't know. That's been my constant learning.
For sure.
Geneva, your Aria is at Vivvi Tribeca, and so you're in more of like a group care situation. Talk to us about that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. My situation came very quick and fast. Aria's original due date was February, Valentine's of this year, but she came early, and I had high blood pressure. But in any case, it was just my whole world turned upside down. I thought I had a little more time before due date. And then coming from the hospital is just very tiring, just to do all these new mom things. I knew that I had a bit of a timeline because my maternity leave was only, so long, and that I needed to learn quickly. But there was a lot to figure out. My husband and I had to figure out what we needed, what options are out there. And we just basically started by talking to many different people. I also went through the route to interview some nannies and talking to parents to understand this process, what to ask nannies when I went to interview them. Then also the daycare route and the options there. I quickly learned and realized what we needed. So it started with a self-reflection of what works for us in our unique situation. And everybody's going to have to also get that figured out for themselves, because not one size fit all for everybody. My home is not so conducive for having my daughter here when she cries. I'm on conference calls such as these, and it would just not be so conducive. So right off bat, I knew that I needed to send her out somewhere, and somewhere close. And then operating in that framework, I do long hours in the office. So I needed some flexibility with the hours and not have to worry about being nickeled and dimed for every hour that I'm late, or even every minute that I'm late. And lastly, it's also reliability. I wanted to be sure that the childcare or the teachers, which is what I end up, pursuing with Vivvi, that there is a reliability that I can send her to daycare because they're available. So that, in a nutshell, is some of the considerations through my own personal experience.
You hit on so many important points. And I think the most salient one is like figure out what's right for your family and have that conversation with your co-parent or your partner. That's such a great insight. So Bronwyn, I'm sure you meet tons of families who are dealing with all sorts of levels of anxiety during pregnancy and early parenting. How do you help them make sense of it all? Like, how do you take in all of these? Because I think that's like the core problem of parenting today is like there's too much advice, there's too many resources. How do you help people sort of distill, cut out the noise about childcare specifically to determine what's best for their family?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. There is a phenomenon called information overload that it's paralyzing, and it's not just coming from the internet. Anyone, who's a new parent knows. I blame everything. I always say your mother-in-law, but that has nothing to do with my mother-in-law, just embodiment of the person. I love my mother-in-law. If she ever sees this, it's the embodiment of the person who's whispering in your ear, always telling you what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing, what they did. And you start to question every move you make. And the problem with that is that the majority of it's just anecdotal. They're just talking about what worked for them or what they wish they had done differently. And it can be very anxiety provoking. So then you go to Google all these things that you've heard, and you can corroborate or find anything you seek. So it really can be overwhelming. So the reason why I started Seedlings Group in the first place, 15 years ago, going on 16, when I was pregnant with my firstborn, was because of that fact. And that is, the good news is we have this whole body of research that's is evidence-based, longitudinal, where we can see how kids grow up in certain realms that are based on samples of different ethnicities and economic groups. So we can start to make some very confident declarations or statements about certain things when it comes to parenting and child development. And so what we hope and what our goal is with parents that we work with is to be the sifter through all of the noise and be able to just be a reliable source of really quality information. And the good news is that for the most part, when it comes to research, you really can, once you get to a certain quality level, find the advice or tips or tools or strategies that fit for your family. And particularly in a lot of the very big areas, polarizing parenting areas, a lot of those situations, like, where your child sleeps, assuming they're safe, or where they go to, what kind of school they go to, and all things, whether you breastfeed, most of them are personal parenting decisions. They really aren't going to influence who your child becomes, but there are things that do. And so quality of childcare, the experience of your baby during the day and the predictability of their environment and the people that are taking care of them, it matters. It definitely matters. So this is obvious a very big stressor for parents, not surprisingly. And it was for me, even though I know all the research, because all of a sudden this person who's either been inside of you for 10 months, let's face it, not 9, or you've been with them every minute since until it's time for you to separate, it's evolutionary. Our goal is to keep them alive and keep them thriving. There's nothing that's going to trigger a stress response than separating into a strange situation. So a lot of parents are very, very scared. They don't have the village or the family. Grandma doesn't, as frequently as we'd like, step into full-time, take over and always be available. And even if they do, like Michael said, sometimes the family arrangement becomes too informal. And it's very scary, both ends, the daycare end or nanny. A nanny, assuming you don't get it from a personal recommendation from your best friend who had this person for 25 years and swears by them, it feels scary just as much as dropping them off at some environment that they've never been to nor view. So what I always do and what we always do as developmental psychologists is turn to the research. And so when parents come to us and they want to know, what does the research say? Is it better? You know, basically there's two opinions, or like the contradicting opinions in the world. And that is, well, obviously it would be better if one can afford it to have a nanny, a high quality nanny who's in the familiar environment of the child's home and keeping the predictable, consistent routines that the family have recommended, and so on and so forth. And then there's another camp that would say, clearly the best opportunity for a child to grow is in a high quality environment, like a daycare, where they'll have socialization. You can have more, you can feel more secure with the monitoring of the environment and the regulations and the supervision. You have more eyes on what's going on, accountability, so on and so forth. And that's the big debate, and it's kind of confusing and scary. And the good news is, well, here's the news, and that is, there's a lot of research, a ton of research on out-of-home care, like a daycare that's formal, like a licensed, regulated daycare, versus informal out-of-home care. There's a lot of information on that, right? And there's also information on out-of-home care versus stay-at-home parenting, traditionally stay-at-home moms. And then there's also some information on out-of-home care versus all other care. But the problem is that doesn't answer the question really specifically that we're asking here. And that is, does a nanny, a specific private nanny to one family, compare, or how do they compare to the long-term outcomes to daycare? And so what we do is we sort of extrapolate from all the research that does exist, which is quite a bit, on how kids thrive. And what we know is, number one, what matters more than anything really is the experience of a child in their home. So the responsiveness that they're getting from their family, the limit setting, the predictability of their environment, their experiences with play, and all of these great things, right? Like there's mountains of research on that. And then the second is the quality of their child care experience, period. So in the end of the day, the good news is that you matter and your home life matters. Even if you work, you can still have a very strong, secure attachment. And the second is the care that you find for your child, no matter where it is, what matters a lot is the quality. And so at the end of the day, it does become quite personal. And of course, I'm sure with more questions, we'll talk about the pros and cons of each, because there are some. And like Geneva said, at the end of the day, given that, what I'm saying and what the research says is there really are no significant outcomes for your child in terms of quality daycare, quality nanny. We really don't know of any significant. But what works for you, what works for your family, the fit for your family. And that's incredibly important consideration. It's just like, someday the same group may be questioning whether they're going to send their child to kindergarten as an early summer birthday, or if they want their child to be the oldest in the kindergarten class. And even that research boils down to the individual child. And it's very similar in this regard.
Yep. So many gems. Thank you. Thank you, Bronwyn. Michael, you were right. So Michael, I want to go back to something you said in your intro, which is you're asking different questions during this nanny search that you're embarking upon with your 11-week-old. What differences are you seeing in the process this time? Like, what could you have told, Michael on the first go around to learn from what you know now?
Yeah, I think the first time around, my wife and I are not routine people. Doesn't come very naturally to us. And so the first time around, we really thought we needed someone that can instill that and bring that to the table. We actually found that what was more important to us was someone that most closely aligned to the way we would want to treat, discipline, all of those to our own child, how we would do it to our own child, and not really find the yin to our yang, but really like have someone that was really aligned to our values, principles, etc. And I think the first time we ended up with like a 70% match in that regard. And what we did get was, you know, we had someone who was super regimented, not a disciplinarian, you know, not a punisher or yeller or anything like that, but, you know, really was really dedicated to development and independence. That was like, she was incredible at teaching independence. You know, first child to know how to put on her own shoes, potty trained at 18 months. Like, it was, you know, super helpful to us in so many ways. Like, every parent wants that independent child, but there were certain things that that also didn't align with some of our values and principles, in a way that was not alarming or we need to get rid of this nanny, but in a way that made us feel, oh, we would do it different, and we have a chance to do it different. So this time around, we want more emotional development, more connection to the nanny and the child. There were moments, it was very hard, you know, our daughter kind of resisted the mornings. We could see her get emotional. I'm sure Bronwyn's like, God, yeah, makes a lot of sense. But and my wife had a hunch that like this really wasn't a good fit. And you know, when they got into the day, things would smooth in, they would have a great time and all that, and we would see it. But there was this resistance in the morning, and that was a sign. So we want someone where there's really just like a true love and connection. And that is really more important to us this time around. I think also because we're more confident in our parenting, we know ourselves better and we know what to expect at every stage. And I don't know, we probably wouldn't have, I don't think going back, I would change it. Probably would have made the same decision. But now going forward with a second child, we know what we didn't know. And for any second parent, you know, for first time parents out there, like there really is just learning and constant change. That's okay. That's, you know, I think that's the baseline of parenting. And it's okay to feel discomfort, and but it's also good to understand your gut, understand your instincts, and rely on that as much as possible, because as Bronwyn said, so much of the research is about your individual child. No researcher, none of that is going to come in and know your individual child better than you know them. So you have to trust what's inside and what you know about your kid and your family more than anything.
Yeah. So important to trust your instincts. And those instincts are not, I believe that they are not unique to maternal instinct or moms. It's like a parenting instinct that you develop with your individual kid. Geneva, you talked about long hours at the office and needing that flexibility. How do you, if you're entrusting these caregivers at Vivvi with Aria, how are you going about sort of like communicating your needs and what strategies that you want them to employ? How are you getting that sort of like two-way communication going with them?
No, absolutely. The caregivers or teachers at Vivvi, they frankly see my daughter awake more than I do. 7 days a week, Monday through Friday, I'm working in the office. They see her more than I do. So it's so important to have open communication and open dialogue with the teachers there. I see them in the morning, I see them at pickup. But thankfully, there's also the Vivvi app that gives me sanity and a peace of mind. I use it to communicate to the teachers. I don't hesitate to message and to get feedback, because I too am learning and leaning on the caregivers and teachers. There's so much development happening in this first year and so on, and that I'm someone that like to learn by asking questions. Sure, I can Google and do some reading on my own, but I so much prefer to have someone to talk to, someone who's experienced to ask these questions, similar to my time at the hospital with Aria in NICU for a whole month. I was relying on the nurses to teach me how to do things, and I'm transcending that over to the childcare space. So I have a really good relationship with them, and I so appreciate that they are listening to me as I am listening to them, and I'm learning from them. And then they're also genuinely interested in what's happening on at night or even on the weekends, because I wanted continuity. I wanted a bit of continuity because over on the weekends, we weren't so structured at all. And it's not that we really, really have to be, but I was just, you know, I'm just so glad that there's some structure with the Vivvi helping get Aria into a schedule. So there's some predictability as to, you know, when she's going to be hungry, when she might need to take a nap, because in the early months, we were just flying by the seat of our pants. My husband didn't even know what was day and night, and then we were so tired. So you know what I mean? I so appreciate learning from them, and also their willingness to listen to me and what I'm observing at home, and just kind of have that continuity across the board.
Absolutely. I can't. 4 weeks away from my due date, and I can't believe I'm about to be back in that zone. But here we go. Bronwyn, any advice, you know, zooming out to your purview, any advice for creating sort of a successful, you know, pattern of communication with caregivers and parents? I know myself with my nanny, there's been, you know, she's very experienced and brings her own thoughts and expectations to the table about, you know, raising my daughter. And I respect that, but we've had moments where like we've disagreed about things. Like, any advice for people that might be embarking on this relationship for the first time, how to keep good communication lines?
Yes, for sure. But really quickly, one caveat, Michael's right. I can't let it go without saying that was a sign for Michael's daughter because he knows his daughter well. But for everyone else, it's very developmentally normal for a child who very easily went to their daycare with joy or their nanny with joy, sometime around 15 to 18 to 20 months, to all of a sudden, when they hear the nanny walking in or the elevator or mom gets her bag or dad gets to go to the daycare, freak out. And people always assume that something negative must have happened, but it's more about cognitive brain development, that they now make the association between those signs and separating from their primary caregivers, and has nothing to do. So I'm not saying Michael's not he's the expert of his daughter, but I don't want everyone to freak out.
Fair point. Fair point.
It's very, very, it's very common. And people ask me that all the time. And I always say obviously if your warning signs are going off with your nanny or daycare, obviously investigate, but generally speaking, it's normal and expected. It's just brain development.
We happen to have a very verbal toddler that was able that we could piece things together, that there's no major warning signs, but the comfort level we were able to piece together, that was very specific to our daughter. But at first we, of course, we're just like, oh, this is separation anxiety, normal like developmental stuff. Normal development. Let me talk to Bronwyn. She'll talk us through. But
I just like, oh God, everyone's going to fire their nannies at like 16 months because they're going to think it's not a good relationship with it. Anyway, so the next question, your question was, no, I'm just kidding. So I know, what was your question? What are some things that now would be important to really
best practices for parents to caregiver communication?
So that is a very important topic, and that is, you could be, you know, a CEO of a huge company and fire and manage and have no problem being a boss of many, many, many employees. And this relationship is unique. It is not something that anyone has ever experienced. And that is to be the boss of a family member, right? Like someone who is you love and who loves your child and is helping you raise them. And it's a very it can be especially in the very beginning, uncomfortable and awkward to have these kind of conversations that feel critical, or when here you are at work and they're taking care of your children. So what I would say is, yes, acknowledge it, be self-aware. People who work with me, I always say, like, every nanny in town must hate you, because every parent in the world blames everything on, well, this is what Bronwyn said, don't blame me. But really the truth is that should be acknowledged from the start, and particularly as a new parent. And frankly, I mean, I am a developmental psychologist. I know all the research. So my job is to know the research. And still, although I have no nanny anymore because I'm a 16-year-old who is basically nanny, I'm just kidding. But it would still be awkward, because you never want to feel like you're stepping on someone's toes, especially if you're a new parent and they've been in the business taking care of kids of their own and now others for 20 years. So the first is to say that it's very important to acknowledge that I'm learning as I go along. I'm learning about my child because their temperament is developing, and I'm beginning to understand who they are as a unique individual, and how sensitive they are to things or not, and how strong-willed or not, or cautious or risk taker. And as I get to know him or her better, I'll probably change some ideas of things that I want, how I want limits to be set with them, or how I want, these kind of whatever comes up. As the saying goes, I'm also learning about classes and schedules and the things I say. I'm always interested to hear what your thoughts are. And then I'm always going to, to turn towards research or to turn towards other people. And I hope that we can keep that communication open. But please also bear with me. This is my first chance to be a parent. And I imagine there'll be some things that you might disagree with. And if that's the case, please let me know in a kind way, but it doesn't mean that I'll change what I want to do. And it's very important to acknowledge that. And in fact, with all the families I work with, what I usually say to them is, I would recommend, and frankly, even in a daycare setting, it's just more probable that this is going to happen anyway, is a quarterly meeting, so that you're not, because something negative has come up, I need to talk to you about it. But it's like, let's just sit down. Let's talk about how things are going. Let's talk about development. Things are changing. What toys do we need to update? How is she in classes? What do you think would be of interest to her or him? And also, I've recently learned that an earlier bedtime is blah, 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 or whatever it is, so that you're not just talking about critical things, but you also have a nanny who hopefully is free to speak, so they're not harboring, and then the final piece is that it's 100% as much upfront communication as possible. And I would say that begins with the contract. Like, it's really important, as with any work, that everyone is on the same page. We know what national holidays is Good Friday considered. What about, all of those things where they're kind of a little vague, address them. And the problem is, and this is what Michael was sort of talking about, and many people, and that is, we don't know to address them when we're first-time parents. And so things come up that we never even considered or thought about, overtime, or whatever it is. And that's something to always just be acknowledging to your nanny, or and I hadn't considered that. Let's review. So to be very clear and communicative, it's the spiral of any situation is when everyone's harboring a little bit of resentment, and that probably that's a little bit easier with going to a quality daycare, because they've thought of all these things beforehand. But you are winging it to some degree. And the truth of the matter is, just for everyone's sake, what's incredibly important that first year, more than anything, is responsiveness and warmth and predictability, and someone that's snuggling and speaking. You can think about limit setting and discipline and all these things as you go. Yeah.
Yes, and I was living everything you were saying, because everything you just talked about has been my learning curve with my nanny in the past year, and have built many teams at various companies, and did not prepare me for managing a nanny where you're managing them on two different levels. Like, one of them is the tactical contract, days off type stuff, and then another one is developmental milestones that your baby is hitting, and strategies and sleep schedule and all these various things that are so important to you. So thank you for that. I did want to get to an audience question. If there's anybody else that has questions in the audience, there's this little box down on the bottom that says Q&A. You can pop your questions in there. We'll try to get to them. We have about five or 6 minutes left. So Rebecca Sosa asks, opposite question to the one we just talked about before. I feel like my 15-and-a-half-month-old likes the nanny more than me and dad. And I love that you asked this question, Rebecca, because I just experienced this in the past 2 days with my nanny. I've been working, it's fall, we're doing lots of events. I've been working a lot. And in the last 2 days, my 14-month-old, when I've come home, like cries hysterically when I go to grab her from the nanny, which, as you can imagine, as a mom, is a heartbreaking thing.
Yeah.
But what gives me solace is that I know that it means that she is securely attached to the nanny. And it means that she loves her. And that makes me feel on another level very comforted. But Dr. Bronwyn, any insight you can add to that one too? I'm sure it's something you hear a lot.
Oh yeah. I mean, I hear it all the time. And you're right. Like, it does give you some solace, but let's face it, it still hurts really badly when it happens. And of course, that's the ideal, is that your child's forming an attachment with someone else outside of the family. And that's positive, very, very positive. But I'll tell you that, assuming that you have quality one-on-one time with your child, right? So that, that you are meeting their needs at least 30% of their time and being responsive to them as a human, then you, as their primary caregiver, you trump everybody. You do. Okay. So, and also you're in it for the long run, right? And so there's that. There's also this, and that is most negative reactions that kids show when a parent comes to take them from the nanny or caregiver or daycare, for that matter, is temperament based much more than that they're preferring someone else, and developmental. Meaning there's two parts of temperament. One is called high approach or low approach. It's just a fancy word for initial reaction. And some kids have a negative initial reaction to everything. Like they don't like something the first time they taste it, or they don't like. And so for some kids, when we come in, particularly at 14 months, where they're now real humans and they're really enjoying the book their nanny's reading, or they're playing in their little kitchen with their nanny, and we swoop in and we say, "What's my big boy? How was your day? Come to mommy." Where they often have an initial negative reaction, having nothing to do with how much they love us, but they were focusing on something, they were doing something, they were attending to something with their nanny, or it's just a surprise, a shock. And then the second thing is that as your kids develop, they are becoming interested in other things. And if they begin to perceive you coming home from work as a disruption to their play, to the story time they're having with nanny, to the snack they're eating, they'll resist it. They're toddlers now. They like to be in control and independent. It has nothing to do with their love for us. So it's be confident. It hurts, but also know this: kids show preference for parents too. It's just a roller coaster. It really has nothing to do with their attachment to one or the other.
Yeah. That's a very good point. All right. So Rebecca, we are good moms, and we don't have to worry that our kids love their nannies more than they love us. So Michael, you talked before about sending your 3-year-old to preschool. We have a question that came in through the RSVP form about what the options are for choose programs. So how is a daycare different from preschool? Or is a nanny all the way through going to be able to meet a child's learning needs at this stage? Maybe talk about why did you decide that was the right age to send to preschool?
Yeah, so she's in a choose program now. She was 2.5 when it started, and the kids in her class range from just 2 to near her age. So it's not separated by how old they are. And for us, it made a lot of sense just where she was developmentally. Also, for us, I think convenience is a huge factor when it comes to childcare and making sure that it can fit into your life. And for us, our preschool is like directly across the street from our house, but also happens to be one of the top preschools in Park Slope. And that was a great combination. And for us, it's play-based. It's very, it's got a great reputation. And for us, we also really, you know, being a pandemic baby, like she was developmentally, you know, in a great place for her age, but also in certain ways, like socially felt like she needed that. Like she needed to be in a class of 11 other kids and teachers that were looking after them and creating developmentally appropriate play-based curriculum, getting exposed to a different day, but some amount of routine was really important. And she's really thrived in that environment, and probably more so in that environment than any other environment she's been in.
Wonderful. And
What are the
Bronwyn, take
hours
us
of
home.
that? Yeah, the program, the hours are full day?
The hours are 9 to 3. So she's a full day.
Yeah.
She goes full day and may even be doing after school, but right now it's 9 to 3.
Yeah.
So Bronwyn, take us home with, is there anything, I know sort of, you know, some brain development shifts over from kind of like, you know, parallel play to social play at a certain time. Is there an age that you recommend kids move into a group setting, or is it sort of family by family?
I think that socialization is always important. And so whether or not you're deciding to have a nanny to be at home with your child or to be in a daycare, it's important. That would be certainly something that I would consider with regard to the nannies' ease at which they are, you know, making connections, making friends. They're the people that are responsible for your child's social life. And in that regard, it's important. That would be certainly a question that I would ask a referral is, how is she at that? And you know, another place that's really great when you're doing a little investigation to be vetting a nanny that you've just met is going to the classes where the child went, that they took care, and talking to the coaches there and the people there. What was she like? What was it? They know the nannies better than almost anyone because they see them every day. But with regard to the experience among other peers, it's not, I wouldn't, especially now, given that, God willing, we're going to continue to be normal and resume and live a normal life, that especially if this is a New York City panel, kids we don't live on farms in the middle of nowhere where they're in their backyard all day alone picking flowers. Like they're constantly being interacted with and spoken to, and you know, from the bodega to the, you know, so they get a lot of interaction. And even during the pandemic, kids were okay. Young children, parents were very scared that they would be, you know, developmentally behind. But for the most part, you know, taking turns, having to wait, having to manage emotions with others, that's happening with us. You know, that's naturally happening. So I wouldn't make a move because you think, you know, it's like not like a puppy where they need to be socialized early, or I would still choose depending on what works for you. And so, for example, like Geneva was saying, she needed the reliability of having a lot of backup people. Like obviously a fear is if your nanny gets sick, but the same goes, you know, kids get sick at daycare and then they can't go to daycare. So there are these things that we consider. There's no perfect answer. There's no perfect punch card. You're never going to find the Mary Poppins, you know, but you're not that either. None of us are. That doesn't exist. So what's important is to think about what your values, what you really, really care about. Do you care about someone taking initiative to be, you know, picking different leaves in Central Park to talk about colors? Or do you care more about someone being the salt of the earth person who's, you know, giving them lots of, you know, warmth and kisses? I mean, honestly, both of those are really ideal. But again, what it boils down to is quality, and quality, aside from the obvious, is very personal. And I think, like living in New York City, we fortunately have places like Vivvi and very, very high quality settings, daycare settings. And then there are also many, many agencies and referral, word of mouth of really wonderful people as well.
Well, what a great note to end us on. We do have so much choice, and you know, it's hard and intense being parents of young children. And I think everybody who's on the line today and just made this time to be here, thank you so much. We're so appreciative. We will be sending out a recording to your email to everybody that RSVP'd, so look out for that. And if you have any questions at all, You know where to find us, Vivvi.com. And have a wonderful night and good luck to everybody. And thank you so much to Bronwyn, Geneva, and Michael. It was such a pleasure being with you all tonight.
Thank
All
you.
right, take care, all you new
Have a
parents
great
out
night.
there. I'm going to sleep my long hour. No, just kidding. I've been there. Enjoy them. It goes by really quick.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.